It seems as if we're living in this kind of bubble here in the United States when we listen to these debates. Afshin, you were at the meetings of the IMF and the World Bank taking place in Washington right now. These are very important meetings, very influential people there. Did you hear anything at those meetings about the election? Any concerns at all?
Yes, absolutely, Anand. In fact, it was quite striking. We're living in a global economy that is becoming very sluggish. World trade is slowing down. Another European banking crisis is looming over the horizon. But there was enormous amount of talk about Donald Trump and the fear of a Donald Trump presidency, because Donald Trump represents in many ways, and he's not alone, but this populist, nationalist nativism that we're seeing play out in advanced economies, not just in the United States, but in Europe as well. This skepticism towards free trade, this deglobalization attitude. Now, we all understand that there's aspects of free trade that haven't worked out, but I think the Donald Trump is taking it to another level. And what was fascinating, Anand, is that you would see finance ministers from South Africa, India, China, from the emerging markets saying essentially what we used to say about the emerging markets, saying, interesting, a lot of potential, the politics are too risky in this place, and if you look at the Pew Global Attitudes Project, they did this fascinating poll where they asked Americans, do you feel your children will be better off? 2/3 of them said no. That same poll in India, China, and the emerging markets, more than 50%, up to 2/3 said yes. So we're seeing a hope gap shifting, and the fear in the World Bank IMF meetings was that a Donald Trump presidency could, potentially collapse the global economy.
Leonard, that's something that, we hear Donald Trump say these things. Is he saying these things because he believes them, because he believes that's a policy he wants to follow, or is he responding to this wave of anger that people have, say, inside the Republican Party?
Well, you have to imagine that he believes what he's saying, and in fact, what he's saying now isn't anything new. You go dial back 25 years, and he was saying similar things throughout the 1980s and 1990s. He was also the one who was leading the birther charge on President Obama. So the nativism, the nationalism, the demagoguery, that's been there all along with him. I think the bigger question is not the fact that Donald Trump says these things or whether he believes them, it's that he's tapping into this vein of resentment and anger and bitterness among a certain swath of the American people, and I think that's something that we have to deal with. This is the challenge for the Republican Party right now. Can they put that genie of anger and resentment back in the bottle and find a way to manage it and channel it into constructive ways? Or will it become a party that's defined by the sort of nativism and nationalism in the years ahead? I think this is the real challenge for the Republicans.
And Atiba, that group of people, that certain swathe of people that Leonard talks about, they're not going anywhere after the election.
Right now, the group that I'm most concerned about is millennials. And oftentimes we're not having a conversation about millennials that just went through this economic recession. So in terms of what we have, it's almost like there's a sickness or illness that came out from that. So this desire to try to break this thing apart, that's part of what we're talking about when we talk about this swath of electorates who want to vote and are basically, no matter what you say to them, no matter what you say that Trump is the enemy, they have already made up their mind. They've already dug into the sand. It's almost like two sports teams playing each other and no one's keeping score. Everyone just picks the team that they want to win, and that's who's going to win. And so with Trump right now, you see someone who he's divisive, but he has hit the nail on the head in regard to this group that feels that this our political structure, the way that it is, has already messed things up so much. How much worse can it get with Trump?
Right, let's go to Hamoud. Hamoud, what did you make of the candidates' broad positions on the Middle East, on the issues that face the United States over there? Things like the Iran nuclear deal, for one. We talked about Syria. Then, of course, there is the dispute between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
Well, all of those issues have been missing. I mean, the discussion stays in general terms. I think in practical terms, Hillary Clinton's position on Syria could be troubling. For one obvious reason is that the no-fly zone is a big issue. Her side with the Kurdish and supporting the Kurdish group can be problematic, for it is a sensitive issue when it comes to the Turkey and other regional allies. On the Israeli-Palestinian issue, that is an issue that seems to be both sides are on the same, in that they both want the negotiations somehow continuing, and they both blame terrorism for the failure of the resumption of the negotiations, and they both target claim that they want a better, stronger relationship with the Israelis and promote Israeli interest. But I think it's a deeper issue, is that discussing the issue of foreign policy is also a reflection of how our universities, our schools, our media address foreign policy issues. We really don't give that much importance to this issue outside a group of few people who are expert. And it seems when we talk in simplicity, where leaders talk in simplicity, they reach a certain audience. And more than anything else, it's easy to spread a lie. And when you continue spreading it, there is that 1% doctrine that some talk about, that somehow it will create some kind of confusion or a mix of reality. So when it comes to the Middle East, it seems like, there has yet to be a very, very serious debate, a serious discussion about the issues that has happened in the region. We sort of have not escaped, except the theatricality that we've seen, except the change of wording that the candidates use, and particularly Trump. It's been always like this. The foreign policy takes a few minutes of the 90 minutes debate. So it's not surprising that we have not heard that much of it at this point.
All right, Afshin, looking at the foreign policies of these two candidates, Donald Trump's foreign policy, well, we got to say we don't know, because he hasn't outlined what his policy would be, say, with a view to Iran or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or what is going on in Syria right now. In fact, he called the Iran deal the dumbest deal ever in the history of deal-making. When it comes to Hillary Clinton, are we going to see largely a continuation of the policies that Barack Obama has followed?
I think, we'll largely see some level of continuation, but I think Hillary Clinton comes from a different generation in American foreign policy thinking, and her generation was more affected by the Bosnia War. She's more of a Cold War foreign policy thinker, and I think she would be more willing to implement the use of American power than President Barack Obama has been. Particularly this issue of the no-fly zone. This hasn't gotten as much attention as it should have gotten. That is military action. Implementing a no-fly zone over Syria is a significant escalation, one that President Obama has been refusing to do. So I think what we'll probably see with President Hillary Clinton is a continuation. The thing that I am curious about is how much has the Bernie Sanders candidacy shifted her to the left when it comes to issues like free trade. She's instinctively a free trader. Globalization, she's instinctively more pro-globalization. And I wonder how much the Bernie Sanders candidacy has shifted her to the left.
Atiba, I want to ask you about another issue. It's a domestic issue as well as a foreign policy issue, and that is, these controversial comments that Donald Trump has made about Muslims. He was asked a question about that during the debate. He told us initially, when he started this campaign to become president, that he would ban all Muslims from coming into this country. That somehow changed and morphed into, well, then it'll become extreme vetting. Let's take a listen to part of that debate.
The Muslim ban is something that, in some form, has morphed into extreme vetting from certain areas of the world. We are going to areas like Syria, where they're coming in by the tens of thousands because of Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton wants to allow a 550% increase over Obama. People are coming into our country like we have no idea who they are, where they're from, what their feelings about our country is, and she wants 550% more. This is going to be the great Trojan horse of all time.
First of all, I will not let anyone into our country that I think poses a risk to us. But there are a lot of refugees, women and children, and we need to do our part.
Now, when it comes to implementing the policy that Donald Trump was talking about, I don't know how you do that. How do you determine who's Muslim at the airport and how that happens? But has his campaign figured out that there's votes there are votes available if I adopt this anti-Muslim position?
Well, as a Republican and a Muslim, I was offended when I first heard it, because the question for me became, well, what happens if I leave the country? I have a United States passport. I'm American. I'm 4 or 5 generations American. But what happens if you look at my name and just automatically determine that I need to go into another line? In terms of what Trump has done and where that swath of the electorate, it seems as if they're not educated, or they don't even aren't aware of what we've been doing overseas, and where I would even go back to say our guilt in terms of how we have displaced millions of families. And so when we're talking about what's going on in Syria, this is something of a larger piece. It's a larger piece of the pie in terms of how we're looked at around the world also, in terms of our relationships. When he says that he, this whole thing about calling this Islamic terrorism, and to paint this whole brush against basically 1 billion Muslims around the world, what he's done, not just globally, but here at home, is alienated himself, alienated millions of people, other people that are here in this country. Now, the question is, under his presidency, how do you actually do that vetting piece? I don't know. I have no idea. I think that it's just another one of those pieces that's like a soundbite that he's using to try to have a resonating voice with other people. Once he gets into office, what happens when he starts to see the national security assessments? What happens when he starts to realize that this thing is a lot worse than he thought that it was? I often wonder what it's like for the president when they first get that first briefing as the president of the United States, and they realize this is not as easy as you thought. I mean, when we look at most of our presidents, why do they age so much? Because the issues are far greater than what it appears to and what we see on television.
Oh, right. And it's interesting. I think you have to look at his Muslim ban and what he said about Mexicans and what he said about all sorts of people in America as part of sort of a larger rhetorical fabric of how he's been appealing to his voters and his base. Basically, those folks out in the country believe that they built America. They were the ones who worked hard, and now America has forgotten them and is favoring everybody else. They're favoring minorities, they're favoring refugees, and he's trying to say, no, I'm going to put the focus back on you. This is a group that's been hit by a sense of status anxiety. They feel that they've lost status in society, they've lost their dominance in society, and as they're falling in status, they believe that liberals and elites and the government and the establishment has been conferring favors on everyone else. So that helps us understand the nativism in which people are pointing fingers at all these groups. And it could be Mexicans, it could be Muslims, it could be African Americans, it could be anybody. But the whole point is he's appealing to a group that feels that they have lost status and they are lashing out at others because they feel that those others have been the favored groups of the elites and the establishment.
And then he comes along, Afshin, and he makes these promises, for instance, like he's going to bring back manufacturing jobs to the United States.
Right.
Is that going to happen?
No, it's not going to happen. And to Leonard's point, that I always thought I can understand the frustration with the elites. I can understand the populism. I can understand that a populist candidate would appeal to those voters. I can understand that when 1 in 6 prime-aged white males are out of the workforce, and those other 5 out of 6 are struggling, to get by. The blue-collar workers I'm talking about, not the, the ones with higher education. I understand all of that. What I don't understand is how Donald Trump has become their standard bearer. That's the piece that is missing, the cognitive dissonance. So I think that, sometimes we, in Washington, we might dismiss them out of hand. Those people out in the middle of the country, they're hurting. There is real pain there. Their jobs have been dislocated. And guess what? There's more dislocation coming with robotics. There's more dislocation coming with advances in technology. And so that scream we're hearing, it could get louder.
But let's just say one thing. Mm-hmm. Minorities in this country have been hurting far more than most of the white working class for years.
Sure.
And nobody has gone out to appeal to their anger or their anxiety or their economic dislocation. And when they do say we need to be able to work in inner cities or help build up minority communities, they're often accused of catering to special interests. And this is where I find this dynamic very interesting.
Okay, let me get quickly to Hamoud in Los Angeles. Hamoud, we heard some commentators say after this debate, in fact, during the campaigns as well, that whomever wins this election, the United States has changed. There was a reporter for the Pan-Arab newspaper, Al Hayat, who said, in both parties, there's an exhaustion with the status quo, with the familiar faces. Donald Trump has capitalized on this wave of anger. We've been talking about that. So do you also think that even, no matter who wins this election, that it's not going to be business as usual after this?
Well, there is one theory where, and I think Afshin mentioned this, there is a pattern in American foreign policy that, you built on your predecessor, and there is a continuity of the same somehow with some variation. So there is that. But what changed is, I think what President Barack Obama brought to the front scene is allowing the regional partners, namely Saudi Arabia, Qatar, to play a role in foreign policy that is not necessarily that what was expected in the past. Okay. The involvement of the Saudis in Syria, in Yemen, in Bahrain, all these are indication that it is expected of these regional players to continue to play that role.